All right. Well, it is 12:01, so we will get started. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Katie Bradford Osborne. I'm the founder and curator of Roaring Artist Gallery. We are a fully virtual art gallery that supports and exhibits exclusively the work of women identifying and non-binary artists. And we are here today for the second of our Awakening in Furor artist talks, and I'm very excited to hear from these artists. We have some really great artists, two of which actually were the winner and the runner-up for the Jurors' Choice Awards. So that's kind of exciting to have you two together. And Adrienne, your work is just gonna be perfect, I think, to compliment. Yeah, I'm excited for this talk, basically. So we're gonna have Adrienne, you're gonna go first. I'm gonna read your bio and then I'm gonna hand it over to you. All right. Okay. Adrienne Berkland is a portrait painter based out of Savannah, Georgia. She has a daily painting practice which functions as a form of meditation where the action of painting allows her to shut her brain off and let the paintbrush flow. In addition to her daily practice, she is working on a series of self-portraits that focus on exploring her own identity and autonomy. And that's what we have here today. So Adrienne, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, I'm super thrilled to be here. As Katie mentioned, I'm a portrait painter, but that's just a little hat that I wear, and a recent hat, I would kind of say, because I went to school for art education and art history, but following graduation, I ended up going into a career completely outside of the arts. And there was almost a 5-year gap in my life after college where I wasn't creating any art at all. And portrait painting was kind of my avenue back into becoming a creator. And while I balanced my professional career and my art, art was kind of just a meditation for me and a way to get a break away from the stresses from my job. And it was really just like a brain drain. So when this past May, I quit my job to focus more on art so I could really explore some ideas. So a friend had sent me the Awakening in Furor call to art, and it just seemed like perfect timing with what was happening in my life, because I feel like I am really just on a personal artistic awakening. And in that process of figuring out what I want to express as an artist, I realized a lot of that has to do with rage. And so yeah, the Awakening in Furor call to art was just really special to me because I think it's kind of representative of what I'm going through right now. And I wanted to thank you, Katie, for including me on this call to talk about it. And I'm really honored to just be surrounded by so many other strong female voices, because that is something really important to me. So yeah, I'm excited to share a little bit about what got me here, what I'm doing, and where I plan on going with my art. So I'm going to start with a little screen share. So let me pull that up for you. There we go. Okay, so what I have pictured here are my two pieces that are part of the show, and I'll talk more in detail about what these two pieces mean to me. But what is really important about these two pieces were they were the first two paintings that I felt like I made for myself after stepping away from a more traditional career. And they were the first two paintings that weren't for commission, they weren't for practice, they were just ideas that I felt like I really needed to express. And I finally had the space and time to complete them. The years prior to working on this current body of work, which is largely self-portraits, is a time that I kind of consider a practice period. But I did think it was important to talk about that time period because I think there's a lot of artists who their career isn't necessarily art and they're carving away time because either they have a full-time career outside of the arts or they're a full-time caregiver, and art becomes something that's fragmented. And while that was a struggle in my life, having to deal with that fragmentation, it was also a really defining period of my life and what really made me whittle down what was important to me with art, because I had limited time to work on it, and it helped me define who I was as an artist. And I don't think I would have been able to make these two works if I didn't have that period in my life where I was balancing those two things. So what I figured I'd start with is talking and sharing what I was working on back during that period where I was balancing basically two different lives, I feel like, in a way. So I'm usually self-described as a portrait painter. After the 5-year gap that I took in college, after college, where I wasn't making art, the way I got back into art was doing a daily practice of portrait drawing and portrait painting. It was basically a time where I would come home from work and I would just pick a picture and copy it. And it was a period where I feel like I was almost a machine. I was just trying to copy photos. And it really helped me hone my skills though, because I was really just focused on copy this, copy this, copy this. And it helped me figure out what medium I preferred working with. It helped me define what my style was. And even though when I look at this body of work, I don't think it's representative of my concepts, it is representative of my technical growth. And that's why I think it's a pretty important area that I will always turn back and look to because of how much growth I had during this period. So these paintings here are more of my recent portrait paintings. And they're when I kind of narrowed down which mediums I prefer the most, which is acrylic and gouache. And it also, when I started playing around with my personal style and trying to not just copy a painting or copy a picture, but to put my own self into those pictures. So all of these are ones that I manipulated in some way to represent me more than just copying something. So from here, when I was working on these, I feel like that's when I was trying to identify myself as an artist. And I realized that I was scratching an itch with making them, but I wasn't really doing what I felt I was wanting to do. It felt more mechanical. So from here, I jumped into another series of work that was once again me just trying to explore what I wanted to talk about as an artist. And these works are more related to my place here in Savannah. And I was trying to capture basically my life and what experiences were impacting me. And what I realized in making these paintings that weren't just portrait paintings, but areas around me, was that what I was really getting drawn to was color and light. And that makes a lot of sense to me looking back at it from afar, because color has been a really important part of my life. I'm very much so a kind of person who, if I'm in a room with white walls, my mood will be not as excited, and color really lifts me up. And I think color is super fascinating in that way, that it can evoke a emotional and sometimes even a physical response from people. So these paintings, while once again, I don't know if they're really indicative of my concept of myself as an artist, they are super important to me finding out what is really important to me in creating art, which is mostly, a lot of that is about color and lighting and how that can impact people's perceptions and how it can create a mood and how it can draw people in. And that brings us to what I'm kind of working on right now. So here are 4 paintings that are part of a self-portrait series that I am hoping to continue to work on throughout this year. And the painting actually on the left, this one, is actually a painting that I created in college. And I thought it was really important to include it with this series of work because it was basically the last painting I created in college. And in the time of making that painting, I didn't think I was going to put painting to the side. So it was, to me, a beginning of a bigger series of work, but then life happened and it got kind of put on a shelf. So I decided to include it as a jumping off point for this series because I realized in embracing the artistic lifestyle again, that a lot of those issues that I was grappling with during my college years are issues that I'm still grappling with and issues that I'm still trying to understand how they shape me and how they have dictated the choices that I make. And this painting in particular, I've also kind of realized is most of my self-portraits are reactions. And this painting was a reaction to kind of that catcall culture where I felt, particularly in college, there was a lot of times where I was doing something not sexual in any way. I was going to class, I was working out, I was working. And there's that ever-present catcall of people who think that even if you're just trying to live your life, you're an object that they can sexualize in some way. And creating this painting was a way for me to set the terms for when I felt it was appropriate to be an object. And those terms were not while I was living my life, but it was in this setting where I put myself on display. So this painting means a lot to me in that way because it was the start of a lot of ideas that I am now processing. So that is why I'm including it kind of in this series that I'm working on. And then this is one of the paintings that's on display right now, and this is Bands Off My Body. And this was literally a knee-jerk reaction to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And while we knew it was coming because it was kind of made clear, I was still really shocked with how much it impacted me once the news became official. And I felt just a need that I had to express it in some way. So I decided to work on this painting, which was the first time I tried to introduce some sort of narrative into my painting. What it really is, like I said, a reaction to me feeling like there was a decision made about me that I had so little control of, but had so much control over me. And that angered me, and it still angers me when I think about it. And I wanted this painting to be a reminder that I'm willing to fight, that I'm angry, and that like this is something that is a matter of life and death, and it's something that we should all really care about. And what I really wanted to portray and what I was trying to capture with my pose was what I was channeling when I sat there and I was trying to take these photos was, if I was a male in power and someone was coming to me with something, like how would I sit? What would I look like? And I wanted a pose that kind of had an easy confidence to it and a feeling of come at me, like I have nothing to hide and I'm not scared. And that is what I was trying to portray with this, with the pitchfork being my call to fight, the skull being that matter of life and death, and the pose being my confidence and my power as an individual. And of course, the red representing all the rage that's associated with what happened. And then my next painting that's included in the show is a painting called Hair Control. And hair control represents basically my own personal lifelong struggle with my hair. Not that, I'm fighting my hair, but I feel like there were years in my life where I was keenly aware that people were judging me based on my hair. And that always rankled me. So especially growing up through my teens and through college, I was always cutting my hair and dyeing my hair as like a little rebellion of how I felt I was supposed to keep my hair between, family members or society trying to put you in a box or a job telling you what is professional. It always just bothered me that something that was mine was being controlled by outside forces. And I know I'm kind of coming from an area of white privilege because I've recently started to embrace my natural hair, and I'm not, getting discriminated about it. And there's lots of people out there who do get discriminated about their natural hair. And I just think that's so unfair that there's things in our society that are controlling things that are just natural to us. And this painting was trying to capture that outside forces that are trying to manipulate the decisions that we make with something that is so personal to us. So yeah, these were just a jumping off point for me. I plan on for the rest of the year continuing to work on diving into these self-portraits, because I think an unexamined life is not worth living. So I think that personally for me to feel like I have full autonomy about why I'm making decisions, I need to realize what caused me to come up with these beliefs and what factors shaped me to the person that I am today. And how can I grow from maybe that anger that I have in me? Because I also don't think you should hold on to anger. So processing them through the self-portraits have been both a way to affirm my identity, but also to shed things that I think are negative about my identity. Thank you.
Awesome, Adrienne. Thank you so much for sharing. And that's such a wonderful journey that you've had. I think it is not terribly uncommon to have that time, like that gap of right after college, especially. And I think I'm glad that you brought that out, because I think it's really good for other artists to hear as well. But does anyone have any questions or comments for Adrienne?
I just wanted to say, Adrienne, I love how like how vulnerable you are in your artwork. And I just want to say I really respond to that, because I think that is, I can say for myself personally, not an easy thing to do. So that is something that I really connected with your work. And also just curious about as you talk about your narrative, and I was struck by the material objects that you brought with you. Are those pieces that you like acquire or accumulate, or do you go out and buy them? I'm just kind of curious about how this narrative process is pulled together.
Yeah, well, this narrative process is I feel like pretty new to me, just coming, like I said, from those years there I spent where I was just copying things, not necessarily creating my own story. And once I decided that I was going to dive into figuring out who I was as an artist, I realized that, you know, I needed something more to tell my story than just a picture of my face. So the elements that I've included so far in my 2 self-portraits that have props, so to speak, those are just ones that are, you know, present in my home that, like the skull, for example, Vanitas paintings were always something that really interested me when I was studying. So skulls in general, that reminder of life and death is something that is an important theme to my visual identity. So including one in a painting about me, I think is important. And the pitchfork in general was just, I'm thinking, once again, I was thinking about sitting in a throne as a king, and I was thinking of like peasants fighting against that and like what weapons would they use. So it was more just the state that I was putting myself in that was dictating what props I thought would be appropriate to get that message across.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adrienne, I love your play of lights, just in even in your earlier portraits and in your newer ones, like the shadows on the walls and the way that the colors, like you have the lights around the colors, it's just really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I realized through that portrait painting process how important color was to me, not just in my life, but in the work that I was creating. You know, sometimes the color, like in Rage, my Bands Off My Body, the rage is expressed through the red. But in the hair control, I was really actually thinking about the larger series of work and wanting to create individual works that all had different color themes. So color doesn't necessarily for me always have to have a meaning to it, but it's something that as an artist I find very interesting. So I want to include it in works, particularly in portraits, because color is so important to me. So whether that color is supposed to represent a feeling or not isn't always important, as much as the practice and the technical aspect of portraying that color is what is important to me.
That was an excellent question. I have a question for you on backgrounds. Like for instance, on Bands Off My Body, there's a pretty intricate background. I mean, there's the chair that you're sitting in there, and like, but you can see behind you too. Whereas with hair control, it's much more just colors essentially and textures in the background. Which direction do you see yourself going as you move forward?
I do think the colors and textures is more where I'm drawn to the painting that I completed after that one. It's the similar setup where there's not any setting that the portrait is in. It's just a colored background. I think with the Bands Off My Body, once again, I really wanted it to seem like I was sitting in a throne. So I felt like I needed to have a place that it was in and not just like a floating chair. But it once again goes back to part of making portraits isn't just the ideas I want to express. It's that I enjoy doing it and I want to paint things that I enjoy. And I really just enjoy painting the light and the color and how that works. So I want to enjoy all the processes of the things that I'm making, not just the ideas that I'm trying to express.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much, Adrienne, for sharing. I got very excited when I think Bands Off My Body was one of the first ones that I actually saw whenever I was going through everything. And that's one thing I really enjoy. I get to go through all the artwork as well before I send it off to our juror. So I was excited that she chose it. I thought it was such a strong and interesting portrait. You can feel the reaction in it, but sometimes reaction needs to happen. And I think it does that so strongly. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. And we will, if there's no other questions or comments, then we'll move forward.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Adrienne. Next up, we have Michele Randall. Michele is one of our represented artists here at the gallery. And so she's someone that I know really well. And we've heard from her before in our Encaustics exhibition. You can go back on YouTube and see that particular artist talk, which was fantastic and really fun. But this one is on her work that is in this exhibition and the direction that her work has taken since then. And I'm just so excited to hear from you, Michele. So I'm going to read your bio and then I'll hand it over to you. Endless labor, insecurity, and gratification describe the process of both a mother and an artist. I am a multidisciplinary artist exploring the connection between these roles. Forgotten family photographs and vintage ephemera are the foundation for my narrative work, examining constructed histories that still shape current societal expectations. These narratives are assembled using cyanotype prints, a cameraless photography method. The distinctive blue print implies a sense of memory and nostalgia. I use elements of chance and movement between the sun, shadows, and water to create these dynamic silhouettes. Layers of encaustic, a wax-based medium, is dripped, scraped, and fused across the surface to highlight meaning. My parallel encaustic practice focuses on the abstract use of color and form to consider ideas of boundary, constriction, and movement. I assemble ambiguous shapes and bold splashes of color within the edges of framed artwork. Microenvironments of chaos and order assemble side by side. Encaustic becomes fluid with the addition of heat and slowly cures into a luminous shell over time. In this way, the process requires spontaneity and patience. By choosing process-heavy methods like cyanotype and encaustic, I force a tactile engagement between myself and my work. Each piece is built with multiple steps, from prepping surfaces to cutting apart and assembling images to scraping and layering materials. As the work progresses, the fatigue builds in my muscles and my mind, mirroring the act of caretaking, a practice that requires constant attention and spontaneity and often shows invisible progress, requiring years of practice. I love this new artist statement, Michele. I think that it's just wonderful, and I'm so excited to hear from you. So I'll hand it over.
I will share the screen. Great. Well, again, thank you. I am really excited to be part of. Let me just ask, can you see my mute and all that kind of stuff? Because I don't want that to be right in front of my.
No.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Katie, for including me in this show and allowing me to talk about my work. It is true, I am a multidisciplinary artist, and I often struggle with how to talk about both types of work and what it means to me as an artist. And so I'm looking forward to focusing primarily on my work as a cyanotype artist today. A little background about me: I graduated with an undergraduate degree in marketing, and it took me a number of years to circle around to really focus on my artwork. And I don't think that's uncommon. I come from a very practical family, teachers and farmers and laborers, where working with your hands produced something. And so I circled around this idea. I wanted to be an artist. And after years of being in marketing and then spending some time home with my children, I decided I wanted to pursue it full time. So I went back to school and I got a degree in printmaking. Okay. Why is my technical difficulties? Why am I not moving forward? Got it. So I decided to go back to school in printmaking because it's very process oriented. And, if I was going to be an impractical artist, I was going to do something that required a lot of, technical innovation. And I found that what I really loved from my printmaking experience is the technique of cyanotype. It is a cameraless photography process that was developed 200 years ago. One of my favorite aspects of its origin story is that it was maybe developed by a man, but put into use by a woman, Anna Atkins. She was, I guess what we might call like a self-taught scientist, and she used cyanotype as the first means of cataloging plants and algae, where prior to that you had to use hand-drawn elements. So the idea of cyanotype itself is a medium that invokes this sense of memory. And I think blue, you know, Adrienne, you're talking about how important color is. Blue to me has this sense of memory attached to it, which also is very natural. So as a woman that went back to school in my mid-40s to get my MFA, my youngest child was in middle school. I had two older daughters. All three of my children are now in their 20s, but entering my MFA program at a much older age than many other people, I was immediately conscious of this passage of time, or this shift of being an older woman in a different role as a parent than I was as a younger mother. And so some of my earliest work really focused on how do you capture time, how do you mark, and how do you identify time? And one of the beauties of cyanotype is that it is such an, I'll call it a lowbrow type of printmaking process. You have a piece of paper that is photosensitive, and as soon as it hits the sun or other type of UV light, it starts to expose and darken and become blue. So when I thought about capturing time, I thought about working with waves and how you really can't capture a wave. You can't predict it. You can't, you know, take a photo of it at that moment that you want to. So it was a natural partner for my cyanotype practice. And I took photosensitive paper and put it on the beach right in front of a wave, and often waited for a wave to come and wash over it. And sometimes the first wave would wash the entire thing out and I would have a ruined piece of paper. And other times the wave never hit my paper, even though it would get within inches. And so I would have a very dark piece of paper. And so within this way, I really started to realize that, you know, this is something I cannot control. And the more I tried, the more frustrated I became. Here's an example of what those first pieces look like, where you see the darkened image. That is where the sun was exposing that photochemical solution. And where it is white is where it was sitting on the beach and the wave approached it and washed away some of that photosensitive solution. So again, it was a process in where I had to watch something happen rather than really directly involve myself in it. And here is another example of a more recent photo. And this is a practice that I still continue every time I get near water. I live in a landlocked location. So it just is a really important practice for me to continue to remind myself that I do not have the ability to control everything and to learn to let go. And that's particularly resonant when it comes to the passage of time. The other part of my practice that I think about when working with cyanotype is the characterization of women. And that's why nostalgia is so important to me, because nostalgia is a romanticizing of the past, particularly of women's roles. And I often use these elements of nostalgia, pattern pieces. The woman on the left is a bride from probably a 1970s pattern. And again, these roles of the blushing bride, the young woman, the mother and child. And I just started to incorporate those and build up layers and collages to introduce a narrative. And again, these narratives were a bit disconnected from me. You know, part of my practice is also very abstract. So kind of introducing this idea of narrative was a conscious step in a different direction. So thinking about vanitas or memento mori, also in my work, this is kind of a weird photo, but it's on its side. It's a piece of work that's on its side. When creating collage pieces with the cyanotype, I not only used the ephemera, but I was using plants from my backyard or some pressed plants that I had preserved, thinking of the idea, again, that plants and live flowers were not something that lasted forever. Just as this connection of mother to child, in this very innocent stage of, young mother to 7 or 8 year old child will not last forever. And just how we romanticize those moments of parenting. Another image here of the silhouette of a woman, introducing these themes of the delicate flower, of the bouquet, of putting women as spectacle in this delicate state of youth. So playing with that idea. And then taking it a little bit farther and, introducing these ideas of thoughts and surrealism into it. One of the natural results of doing a lot of cyanotype work is that you have a lot of error and you have a lot of mistakes. And being a practical person, having grown up in that practical mindset, I have never been able to take a ruined cyanotype and just throw it away. So I determined over time that I really love the look of these cyanotypes that I have toned or I have bleached out and I have started again. Again, layering these moments of time in the passage of time and age into the background of my work. This is an image where the flower-like pieces that circle around the head of the woman are cut out collage pieces. And they have started to create a dimension by the way that I've added them to the paper. The woman in the bottom is an image that I took from the New York Times. So as I was going backwards in time and creating pieces with ephemera, I was also staying connected to current moments in time by going through the New York Times every Sunday and cutting out images of strong women, of women that seem to have very strong identity, and trying to incorporate those into my artwork as well. And here is just another example of that type of work where I introduce the idea of collage, and there's a bottom portrait of a woman at the bottom of that piece. So one of the things that I have noticed and known about my work is, although I would like to introduce myself and my story into my work, that is not as easy for me. And I've been trying to come up with ways to begin that process. So rather than just using ephemera, I also began looking at photographs of my ancestors. Many of which I do not know, and many of which my parents cannot tell me who they are, but I know they belong because we have many, many books of old photos of our ancestors. And, I can tell they belong to our family because there are, farmers in the background and elements of that. And so the reason I'm talking about that is if you look very carefully at the lower right-hand side of this image, there is an older woman there holding a chicken. So I'll say my great-great-grandmother, who was assuming great-great-grandmother, and knowing that we had many chicken farmers in the family. And I paired this image with a silhouette that I did get from the New York Times of urban farmers. So again, just connecting the past to the present, this nostalgia of, nostalgia, and I'll say necessity of knowing where our food came from and comes from, that it was something that we valued in the past and something that we value in the present. And I did that. And this is a total aside, but having been an urban chicken farmer for a while, I'll tell you, there's a little less romanticism in that than you might think. So it's a little bit of work, but it's really good to know where your food comes from. So I just wanted to kind of, again, try to think about how we connect the stories from our past to the way that we expect ourselves to be currently in current day. And again, I always connect that to how we expect women to be present day based on our stories that we have had told to us and about us from in the past. This is another image titled "Gopher Hunting" because that was what was on the back of the photograph. So I love this image of these three women and two daughters, and it's very ambiguous. The daughter is sitting in the front, but they were all out for a gopher hunt, and the gophers themselves are kind of vermin, to use a vernacular from the farming terms. And so I paired that with weeds from my garden. So kind of this idea of things that you don't necessarily want. One of the elements that I found from my family photographs, maybe because the women from my past were farmers or were more laborers, is there was a lot of personality in these images that I came across. I felt like I could know who these women were because of some of the props that they had in their hand, or some of the ways that they carried themselves, and they seemed relaxed with their body, and they seemed somewhat unself-conscious. And I also connected that to how we view and present ourselves as young women and older women today in some of our more social media posts. And I was really, really enjoyed looking at those images. So of course, this all it doesn't have to bring me back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but as I'm working with current events, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed very untimely, I did a series of work for her. Just bringing this up, hydrangeas were one of her favorite flowers, so I incorporated those, as well as elements of her collar and an image of her on her first day of work. And so I think what really struck me about her passing, when I think so much about the passage of time and about our inability to control time, is I think of during that moment, I remember that summer literally waking up almost every day saying, Ruth Bader is still with us. Ruth Bader is still with us. And then she wasn't. And she was so determined to stay on that Supreme Court as long as possible. But at the last, but that was impossible. You at some point, you will no longer be alive. And so that really struck me, that inability to control those moments in time, obviously, that none of us can. So I'm going to take a pause right here just to very quickly introduce my encaustic work with this one slide, because it does really relate to the future of the cyanotype work that I have done. And that is just to say that although my encaustic work and my cyanotype work is so very different, the one similarity, and I know Katie talked about this in my artist statement, is just the physical requirements of both. I am really drawn to process. sometimes process over product, and this ability to immerse myself and forget about everything else that's happening around me. And encaustic is like that. The physical fatigue that builds up from making that encaustic work reminds me of the physical fatigue of parenthood. And this particular piece was really important to me because I made it at a time when, very recently last year, I was at a very short residency, and part of our process was going out and walking in the woods. And I recognized how little time I had given myself as an adult with grown children to really spend time on my own and not rushing. I think our body gets so used to rushing and reacting and caretaking that even when that is no longer a priority, we have to stop and allow ourselves to take that time back. So that's the very quickest of snippets of my encaustic work. And again, the reason I bring that back is I have always wanted to integrate that work. And I've done that very simply at first by just making the cyanotype work and the encaustic as a protective layer on top of that. But that didn't really add the narrative that I wanted it to. So the next step, again, thinking about time and process, was capturing some images of leaves in the fall and kind of matching that with a more textured element of the cyanotype work that created more of a frosty element as fall turns into winter. And I discovered at that moment that I have been able to use these two mediums as one particular narrative work. And I don't use them together all the time, but I'm kind of experimenting in that direction. And this is another piece where I use both encaustic and cyanotype. I really, more importantly, want to talk a little bit about the image itself. Again, portrait that I borrowed from the New York Times, but another element that I integrate with my cyanotype often is text from single-use plastic. And one of my favorites is the text from packaging materials that will say, "Danger of suffocation, this is not a toy." Again, thinking about our work as, nurturers and this chance that we could be consumed by that work and somewhat suffocated by that work, for lack of a more eloquent way of saying that. So that brings me to the pieces that I have in the show, and this is called Forecast. It uses a lot of those elements that I've talked about up until now. This does not use encaustic, but it uses photographs from my family album. It uses, and these are three girls that are swimmers. Again, what really struck me about these women was that they were probably in their mid to late teens, maybe their early 20s, but their lack of self-consciousness, and in a way, their lack of sexuality. And when I think about my daughters and their transition from like their preteen to their later adult teen years, and how difficult it is to navigate those years without introducing sexuality and this level of self-consciousness into yourself. So I was really attracted to that. And I also wanted to include some of those elements of Memento Mori, the bleeding heart, and these tulips that are actually almost at the end of their lifespan. If you look very closely at the stem at the top, it's basically wilting within itself. This was a double exposure process where the first piece was exposed bleached out until it was yellow and then was exposed a second time to add that dark layer of blue to give it that aged patina. And this is the other piece of work that is in the show called Love's Labor. Again, pulling in a lot of those images that I talked about. So it's a piece that has multiple exposures. It is a woman whose body I have like cut up and reshaped in kind of an origami silhouette. I used the hydrangea as kind of, again, Love's Labor is the title of it, so that we carry our love, we carry our nurturing of our children on our backs, so to speak. It can be both a heavy burden and a beautiful burden, but you can't escape the weight of it. This kind of ambiguity of how we feel about the motherhood process. And then the little bird at the bottom that's flying away just really symbolizes how time shifts and your role as a parent will shift as well. This is just another perspective of that same type of work, a recent piece that I've just completed. And it does use some encaustic in that additional collaged piece right there. And so very quickly, I just want to talk about a new body of work that I've gone through. This was created right at the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And the final thing that I'm really obviously thinking about is the agency of a body, whether it's an aging body, whether it's my daughter's body and their right to control their own body. And so just introducing these ideas of, you know, the romanticizing and of the pregnant woman without any complications and any worries to become, you know, this fully bloomed woman with no concerns and clearly no financial worries is the implication and the nostalgia element that we've been taught and how that is different from the reality. So, you know, I'm just going to kind of go through a lot of these different pieces where I've just kind of worked with, again, flowers and silhouettes and text to create different connections. And I guess that's my subliminal message to the Supreme Court. And that's all I'll say about that. So, I believe that is my last.
Michele, I had a question about your process, since so much of it is kind of chance. And I was wondering, just, you know, based on the elements that you're working with, so do you go in with a vision how you expect it to end, or are you really just kind of reacting to how it progresses and then determining that it's done based on when your reactions stop? How does that process work for you?
That's a good question. And I will say that has evolved over time. Initially, I was really experimenting to see how I could get the sun to react and create a piece of work. And now it has become a lot more narrative based, where I have an idea of where I want something to end, and I will, if I'm making what we call these multiple negatives, where I will expose it to the sun and get one image and then add another layer of the chemical and do another piece, then there's more of an idea of where I want the final piece to land. Yeah, I think that right now, where a lot of the spontaneity still occurs is where I'm reacting to current images that I might find in the newspaper, or even stories that are coming up in the newspaper, and then I want to make a piece in response to that.
That is awesome. That was a really good question. Michele, thank I'm familiar with cyanotype. I know a lot of people are not. Well, they are in blueprints, the concept of blueprints, and they just don't know it. But most cyanotype work that you see is fairly simple floral type work. And I love that you include that as well, but it always is so conceptual. And your work is just fascinating with its layers, and I just think it's so beautiful. So I really love seeing your process and seeing your thoughts behind how you choose these layers, how you choose these different pieces that you're using.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
I have a maybe dumb question about when a piece is finished, because I know a little bit about cyanotype, but not that much. I've never played with it before, but I've always thought it was so beautiful. But when you are done with a piece, does the UV solution, like once it's exposed, or is it completely done, or do you have to be careful with like framing and display and things like that to where it would darken later?
That's a really great question. And I know I really kind of glossed over the process of that. One of the wonderful things about cyanotype is the development process is basically using water. So once it has been rinsed in water, once it's been exposed to the sun and rinsed in water, it tends to fix it so that it can fade over time, and that's a technicality, for another time, but really it's pretty much once it's been washed out and dried, you have the color that you have, and you don't have to worry about it changing. Yeah.
That's awesome. You've chosen two mediums that people probably know the least about.
Yeah.
And I know even with encaustics as well, I get questions a lot like is it gonna melt on my wall? Things like that. And I think it's so fascinating how you've taken these on. You're very brave. You've always been such a brave artist, and I just love what you're doing.
Thank you. I love it too.
If we have any more questions or comments, if not, our last artist we have today is Lucy Pike. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michele.
You're welcome.
All right, Lucy, I'm going to read your artist statement really quickly, and then I'm going to hand it over to you. Right. My art is an exploration of the intersectionality of motherhood and the natural world, navigating questions about environment, place, and the search for balance between risk and exploration. Informed by habitat theory, I traverse the emotional vistas that nature invokes within us: opportunity, danger, and refuge. My work seeks to explore and meditate upon these concepts and boundaries. How do we return to becoming a part of our own world rather than apart from it? Intersecting with this framework for examining our relationship to the natural world, the labor of motherhood is itself a study of prospect, refuge theory. It is a precarious intertwining of openness and protection, of fear and hope. I explore these ideas and sensations through layers of ink that imbue a kind of raw simplicity to the work, investigating both the inner and outer manifestations of environment. I am continually probing the interconnectedness of the feminine self and the natural world. I think that is such a beautiful, poetic artist statement. And I was able to chat with Lucy very recently on Bernadine Franco's podcast, because she was the winner of the Jurors' Choice Award. She was able to come onto the podcast, and I got to join her and talk some more about her art. So Lucy, I am so excited to hear more from you, and I think it's going to be awesome. So I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Katie, for having us all here. Let me see if okay, now can you see that? Okay. So my name is Lucy Pike, and my current work mainly focuses on motherhood and environment, and exploring the interconnectedness between habitat theory and the feminine experience. These are my two kids. I have a 12-year-old son and a almost 6-year-old daughter. This is us hiking in Georgia earlier this year. And being a physical part of our natural world is a huge tenet of my work. The physicality of touching rocks, touching water, being out in a place where we are our primal selves, is a feeling that I really want to carry over and imbue into in my work. And this is a current piece called Shelter, and this is very indicative of my current body of work. So I am an abstract artist, and I am continually asking questions about womanhood, environment, and how we move our bodies through both emotional and physical landscapes. And I connect these questions to Jay Appleton's habitat theory, which ponders the relationships of humans to our outer environments in 3 distinct areas: in prospect, refuge, and danger. And I learned about this theory last year, and it just made a huge impression on me. And very succinctly, it essentially says that an ideal environment for humanity, an ideal outer environment for humanity, has open spaces where we can see opportunity and prospect, smaller enclosed places where we can have refuge, shelter, rest, and then an awareness of and a reaction to danger, so that we can simply survive and that we can have our children survive. And I absolutely loved the symbolism of that very physical theory to an overarching emotional and parenthood theory, essentially. That these are also the ways we live our emotional lives, our mental lives, that these 3 areas, if we have opportunity, if we have refuge and shelter, if we have an awareness of danger and risk and a way to mitigate that while not, while still exploring ourselves and our world, then that is a very ideal environment, mentally and emotionally. So I'm interested in balancing risk and exploration in art and personhood, and asking how we do that. There's an ongoing tension between survival and safety that ripples through these subjects, and those are things that I really want to show and explore in my work. Motherhood was a huge portal to art for me. I was a writer before I started painting. I've always painted some and always done a lot of creative projects, but I mainly wrote and edited. And after I had children, my older one is on the spectrum, and there were so many feelings and such a journey mentally and emotionally that it really became a very transforming experience. And I needed a much more immediate, visceral way to express those feelings and that transformation. And that is how I turned to really strictly painting. I don't write anymore at all much. I really fulfill my need for expression through painting and asking questions through color. So this is a painting from 2019, and I mainly used heavy body and gouache and charcoal. And in 2019, I started to work in a little bit of ink into my work in these areas to get more of a relationship and a back and forth between textures on the canvas. And from there, I started moving into more straight ink. I wanted to fully explore my womanhood and its inherent strength and vitality, and I began asking more probing questions about the natural environment. my place in this ecosystem, and how the framework of feminine personhood corresponded to the framework of our wider biosphere. And I know we have across cultures, it's very common for us to have, you know, Mother Nature, Gaia. We have a very feminine spirit that symbolizes the natural world. And I almost took it for granted, I think, for a very long time. And as I became a mother, and not just a mother, but I think just a woman who grew up in a very patriarchal system and who is starting to look at nature and say, well, wait a second, there is power here, and there is ferocity here, and there is strength here. And why aren't women a part of that? Why are we called Mother Nature? And yet those are the aspects of our lives and our wholeness as people that we tend to be told is not who we can be. And so I started to really see the richness and the depth of that symbolism between place and nature and our roles as women. And I started to ask, what are my responsibilities to the environment, and how do those overlap with my responsibilities to my children now and in the future? And if they do overlap, how do I work within that fullness? If they don't overlap, who is my responsibility to children, to environment, and how do I ask those questions? This is one of my pieces in the show called To Be a Woman. And this is all ink. This is in 2021 when I started to add more ink into my work and to make ink only pieces. These are all acrylic ink and calligraphy ink. And I wanted to find a rawness and a depth of materiality. And that is what ink started to afford me. And I wanted that rawness and that depth because that is what it felt like to be a woman. It felt very open and vulnerable, but also the huge spectrum of experience and emotion that we have as women. And the lighter layers bleeding into the deeper layers on this particular piece felt very much symbolic of the spectrum of womanhood and for me, motherhood. Two events that really changed me this year and put me into the kind of work that I'm making right now is hiking in the desert, believe it or not. But I went to California in January and did some hiking in the desert, and the landscape there and being in the landscape and moving in that landscape was very impactful to me because of the bleakness and the strength and how it felt like I was living inside the theories of habitat theory that I had already been thinking so much about. That it was a very open landscape. There was a lot of opportunity and prospect, and yet there were so many shelters within the rocks. And it felt like a very emotionally symbolic place to be in. The second event that altered my painting practice was my residency at Stay Home Gallery earlier this year. I painted on stretch canvas before that, and I did not want to cart an entire car of stretch canvas because I usually do pretty decent sized paintings. So I brought rolls of canvas. I had experimented with rolls of canvas before, unstretched, but had never sat down and only had that material. I'd always had other materials that I could go back to when I kind of got frustrated with unstretched. And it became very liberating for me to take the canvas from the frame. And it became a very authentic way to paint for me because I paint well beyond whatever size that I think I might approximate. And I don't have a border of, if I'm making a 36 by 48 or a 48 by 60, I make it much larger. And so I feel like there is not an ending, and it feels very freely very free and expressive, that I'm not worrying about a beginning or an end. I'm simply painting those emotions and questions. This is my second piece in this show. It's called Nova. It felt very indicative to me of a rebirth. The red of Fury really reminds me of the one that Adrienne has. It encompassed really that, again, that whole spectrum of womanhood to me, the rebirth all the way to the fury and even death and decay. And here you can see a little bit of my process, in that I do not exactly know what the end result will be, because I do paint so much beyond what I plan on stretching, that it adds an element of mystery for myself, because I don't really know what it's going to look like until the very, very end when I stretch it. And so this piece was much wider, and I decided on this size. And so when I stretched it, I get an extra element of surprise and lack of control that I do not plan every inch of the painting perfectly. This is another recent piece that is ink on raw canvas. And the ink and the raw canvas are materials that allow me to explore through color and varying levels of transparency the questions I now do not want to stop asking. How do I embody both the power and softness of motherhood? How do I move within and interact with the natural environment? And how does that affect my choices as a person and as a mother? And these are two of my recent works in a show at Hoover City Hall here in Alabama. It's actually opening today. And these are 36 by 48s ink on raw canvas. And then I added my information on the bottom of more of my work. And that, I believe, is it. Yes. So thank you all so much. That gives you a little peek into where I've been the last few years and what I am doing now.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was wonderful. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I do. I think it's really clear your relationship with the environment through your paintings. They very much evoke like a feeling almost of a landscape, and the colors, I think, I can see how it ties also to womanhood. And I'm curious, with material and your process seems to be rather free-forming, and I was wondering how you apply ink and like how to do those forms, especially like that particular, your one, that the red one that's in the show that has a pretty definitive like rectangle there. Was that something that you used a brush to get on there, or do you allow the ink to spread and manipulate it in some way? And I was wondering if you could just talk about that process of actually creating.
I actually use a brush for all of it. I sometimes it will spread, but that's usually an accident. I don't try to let it spread. I do apply it, and then I use a brush, and then I will wait until it's dry if I don't want to bleed. If I want some bleed and some color mixture, then I will paint wet on wet. But I do it all with a brush.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Just, I really love that process of using the ink. It really feels evocative. I mean, it just has so much emotion in it. And again, yeah, the color and the immersion of the color. I'm curious, because there is so much color in all of your pieces, have you ever experienced or experimented with like the absence of color, or the absence, I guess maybe that piece that is in the show has a lot of white space in it.
Yes.
I'm answering my own question, but
no, most of my pieces up until fairly recently have actually had a lot of white space, and that was on more like the first piece where I was painting still a lot on stretched canvas at that point, and I would leave lots of negative space around whatever image I was working on with the non-representational imagery that I was working on with the ink. But I have since switched, since I started painting exclusively on the floor, I have since switched to mainly large blocks, large fields of color. And I do have some, I didn't put in the slideshow, I do have some that are like quieter and more subdued. But a lot of times I end up with the deeper colors because they really do feel so much, like you said, so much more evocative to me.
The colors and the layering and the movement you're getting with the ink is just fantastic. I just love it. To Be a Woman is the cover image for the poster for this show, and it just has that kind of emotion that was so perfect for I was just thrilled whenever Bernadine chose that image for the Jurors Choice Award. And thank you so much. That was awesome. Do we have any other questions or comments? How are you choosing your color? That's one question I do want to ask. Like, you have the deep reds, obviously, in the second piece, which name has just flown out of my head. The second piece that you have in the show, and the deep reds also in To Be a Woman. How are you choosing your color?
A lot of times, and I almost don't like this word anymore, but a lot of times it's very intuitive. It's very what I have recently experienced, maybe physically while being outside, or it could be something that I'm asking about environment. Maybe I have climate change on my mind, and so I want to work within the sorts of colors that struggle brings up inside me. But it's very organic. I do not come up with a color scheme before I begin. I'll usually have a starting off color, and usually they're mixed. I don't use a lot of straight ink colors, but usually I'll have a starting off color, and then I will move on from there and decide what I want to start pairing it with.
That's really cool. It reminds me a bit of the concept of like synesthesia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get that. And probably part of that is from the ink and the way that the ink sort of works together and the layers. But yeah, it's really cool to me in that way. All right. Do we have any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much, Lucy. That was wonderful. And anybody who wants to hear more from Lucy, especially about her, the interconnectedness with nature that her work has, you should definitely check out the podcast interview that we did with Bernadine. It was just wonderful to hear. Let's see, Jen just said, I really enjoyed this. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Let's see. And now my computer's being a little strange here. It just started flashing. Okay. All right, we're back. Sorry about that. But yeah, it was a wonderful experience getting to chat with you and Bernadine, Lucy. So I hope everyone will check that out as well. And if you're watching this right now, and let's see, what day does the show? Here we are. If you are watching this before November 13th of 2022 and have not yet seen the Awakening in Furor exhibition, definitely go to roaringartistgallery.com and check that out. Explore it in our 3D virtual gallery. And so you can see all of this artwork, and then also all of the artwork. The rest of the artwork has come in with this amazing concept. And if not, there's going to be a viewing of it on YouTube pretty soon after, hopefully a little tour of it, so that it will be able to live forever. It's one of the great things about having everything virtual. But anyway, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us and for telling us a little bit more about your work. You are three fantastic artists, and I absolutely loved having you all here together to introduce your work and a little bit more about yourselves. And to anyone who has joined us or who will watch this later on YouTube, thank you so much for supporting us at the gallery and supporting these artists. And we'll see you next time. All
Thank you.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.